China built entire cities for people who never came. Millions of apartments were sold before they were even finished. Families poured their life savings into concrete towers. For years, the system looked unstoppable. Then the money stopped. And now, China is trapped inside one of the largest property crises in history. For decades, property was one of China's greatest economic engines. As millions of people moved into cities, demand for housing exploded. Developers borrowed enormous amounts of money. They bought land, built towers, and sold apartments before construction was even complete. The money from new buyers helped fund new projects, and those new projects attracted even more buyers. It was a machine built on constant growth, and for a while, it worked. Property became more than just a place to live. For millions of Chinese families, it became an investment, a store of wealth, a promise that tomorrow would be richer than today. At one point, real estate and related industries became deeply connected to China's entire economy. Local governments depended heavily on land sales. Banks were exposed to property debt. Construction created millions of jobs. Steel, cement, furniture, home appliances. Entire industries were tied to the housing boom. Then developers started pushing the system too far. One company became the symbol of everything that went wrong. Evergrande. It borrowed aggressively and expanded across China. Apartments were sold. New projects were announced. Debt kept growing. As long as money kept flowing in, the machine could continue. But Beijing became increasingly worried about the enormous debt building inside the property sector. New rules were introduced to limit how much heavily in debt developers could borrow. Suddenly, companies that depended on constant borrowing faced a problem. The money was slowing down. Evergrande struggled to pay its debts. Construction stopped at some projects. Home buyers who had already paid for apartments were left waiting, and confidence began to collapse. That was dangerous, because China's property system depended on one powerful belief, that prices would keep rising. But when people stop believing that, the entire system changes. Buyers wait, sales fall. Developers receive less money. Construction slows. And weaker developers fall deeper into trouble. China was now facing a vicious cycle, but the crisis revealed an even bigger problem. China had built far more housing than some areas could realistically absorb. Images of enormous apartment districts with limited occupancy spread around the world. They became known as ghost cities. The reality was more complicated than completely abandoned cities. Some eventually gained residents. Others remained heavily underused. But the message was impossible to ignore. China's property boom had created a massive imbalance. Too much debt, too much construction, and an economy far too dependent on property. Now Beijing faces an almost impossible decision. If it allows weak developers to collapse, the crisis could damage banks, local governments, and millions of families. But if it simply rescues the entire system, the same dangerous behavior could continue. China is trying to stabilize the market without rebuilding the bubble. And that may be one of the hardest economic challenges the country has ever faced, because this crisis is not just about empty apartments. It is about trust. For years, millions of people believed property was one of the safest places to put their money. Developers believed growth would continue. Local governments believed land would keep selling. The entire machine depended on confidence. And once some confidence disappears, rebuilding it can take years. China built cities at a speed the world had never seen before. But the question now is no longer how fast China can build. It's what happens when the buyers stop coming.